Charter California Edition. My name is Brad Pomerance. We are joined today by Ed Hernandez. He's a member of the California State Senate. Over this half hour, we'll be speaking a bit about the Affordable Care Act, about healthcare reform. And so I want to speak with you about just that and get your sense about the rollout over the last 2 or 3 months of the Affordable Care Act. We know California has its own independent exchange called Covered California. The federal government has its issues with healthcare.gov. What can you tell us about Covered California?
Well, Covered California has been doing a great job. As you know, California was the first state to have an exchange. I will admit there have been some glitches at the beginning, but not nearly as many as, say, the federal website. We're bringing in on an average of 10,000 new enrollees a day. So we are way ahead, and as a matter of fact, I believe California constitutes almost half of the entire nation, but we still have a lot work to do,
right.
a lot more work to do.
There's no doubt that California is one of the bright spots as it relates to enrollment in plans through the Affordable Care Act. Kentucky, of all states, is also another bright spot in terms of per capita numbers. Their numbers are really through the roof. At the same time, there are some statistics within the California numbers that I want to really look at more specifically. Right. One focuses on the Latino population. As you may know, Latinos make up about half of the uninsured in California. There's about 7 million uninsured in our state, about 3.5 million are Latino. But when we look at Covered California, the trends suggest that only about 3% of enrollees are of Latino descent. Where do we go with that?
Well, there's a lot of work that needs to be done, and I agree. As good a job that California is doing, we are doing a very poor job in getting the Latino population to enroll. I believe that the success of the Affordable Care Act in this country is going to be dependent on the success of the Affordable Care Act in California, and the success in California is going to be dependent on the LA County in particular, because it has the largest number of Latinos in LA County, and the Latino population has the highest incidences of diseases like diabetes or high blood pressure.
Think about this. In California, 29% of all Californians are Latinos, yet only 3% have signed up. I mean, that's a huge disparity. I know that Covered California, sir, is spending a lot of their advertising dollars to target the Latino population. With Spanish-speaking ads, although some Latinos clearly are bilingual. But that being said, where's the disconnect? I know that you do represent areas with significant Latino populations. Why is it that there's such a disparity?
I think it's a couple reasons. The first reason is a little bit on the language, even though they've been doing a lot of media outreach. But what I think they need to do is put boots on the ground and actually have more individuals to sign individuals up in those particular communities. And we need to look at this in a much different perspective. It's not just putting an ad out saying, go to the web page. We have to have a conversation with Covered California, which I'm going to have very soon.
Please.
And we have to look at it as a campaign, to actually do phone banking, get people out in the community, in the churches, in the nonprofits.
And I also think about what we know as the digital divide. As I understand it, Latino homes have fewer internet connections than their counterparts.
Yes.
And so if Latinos really need to access an internet connection to sign up, they may not be able to.
No, I agree. And it's cultural, it's language barrier, and it's the digital divide, as you mentioned. So we have to figure out a way how we get that message, even if it means going to their home, walking door to door, getting them on the phone, talking to them, getting them comfortable.
I also want to speak about what we know as navigators. Navigators are those that have been certified by Covered California to literally navigate those through the website. That is one area where California has said that they have fallen down a bit. That the navigators are not online at the rate they should be. And as I understand it, especially with those that have multilingual capabilities. Is that also part of the problem?
Yes, it's a big part of the problem. But in defense of the Affordable Care Act and Covered California, this is a huge undertaking.
It is.
And we are going to work through these problems, I am convinced. But in order to be successful, we have to make sure that we get the navigators or the individuals, the boots on the ground, as I said, that can talk to the consumer, can talk in Spanish, can talk to the patient, can talk to them and convince them to join up and sign up and help them sign
Now,
up.
I know that you're an ophthalmologist.
Optometrist.
Yes. I get those all confused. Psychiatrist, psychologist, it's a little confusing. And you do still practice a bit.
Yes.
And so what are you hearing on that side of your professional life? Not so much as Senator Hernandez, but Dr. Hernandez.
You know, what I'm seeing is, in where I do practice is in a predominant Latino community, a lot of Spanish-speaking patients. And what I see as the patients come in is there is a need for health care.
Right.
They absolutely need that entry point to primary care. And every chance I get, even though it plays a small role in it, when somebody comes in uninsured, hey, do you realize you can now get health insurance through Covered California? You might qualify for Medi-Cal. You can get a subsidy. And I think maybe that's another thing that we need to do is get the providers in these communities to work with patients to encourage them to sign up.
I also want to speak about the young, because we know that in order for the Affordable Care Act to work generally, we need a proper mix of young and healthy versus older and infirm. What we know in California is that the young are subscribing at about their population rates. So about 22% of the young are in the pool of Covered California, and that's where they're at in terms of their general population numbers. But we need more than that. As I understand, we need closer to 40%. So while the numbers are not so dramatically low that they're below their population levels, what can we do, we meaning California, to push the young more toward the Affordable Care Act and its attributes?
You know, I think we need to take the same approach we're doing with the Latino population, but target that particular segment of the of that population as well, where you do more internet, you do more, say, Facebook, you do more social media, because I think they're going to respond to that much more differently and more effectively.
As the chair of the Senate Health Committee, can you effectuate any of that? You know, I mean, Covered California is its own entity. How much can the legislature do? I mean, forget just the chair of the Senate Health Committee.
Well, keep in mind that Covered California, which is an entity created by the legislature, but the legislature has oversight and can, you know, either statutorily change it, it could hold it accountable, because it is still accountable to the people of California. We are elected by the people, and you know, if I have a meeting with, you know, Secretary Dooley or Peter Lee, and I have my
chair of
Covered California, and I express my concerns, they should listen. They should listen, and if they don't, then they should be held accountable.
Here's one area that has caused a bit of consternation, although it's maybe in the rearview mirror, but it's the question of you can keep your plan. You know, President Obama had some significant flack thrown at him as a result of this statement he made in 2010. He wound up giving states the option to allow those to keep their plan even if they don't meet the standards of the Affordable Care Act. California and Covered California opted against. What do you think about that?
I think they should have. They
opted against?
Yes.
You think they made the right decision?
I think they made the right decision. Here's the reason why. The only mistake that the President of the United States made was he should have said you can keep your current plan if it meets the minimum federal standards. And if you have a plan prior to 2010, you are covered. From 2010 on up until 2014, if it meets the minimum requirements or the federal standards, then you can keep it as well.
But it becomes tricky because for some that means their rates are going to spike.
Well, okay.
They may not realize that they're getting better coverage, but you know, dollars and cents.
Well, let me put it in a different perspective. Those individuals that lost or can't have those, it's junk insurance. It's insurance that doesn't allow them to get proper health care coverage. The number one reason for bankruptcy in the United States of America is individuals who have health insurance that they thought covered it when they had a catastrophic disease wasn't covered.
I hear you. Okay, will you come back?
I will
want to hear more about it. His name is Senator Ed Hernandez. My name is Brad Pomerance. When we come back, we'll be speaking with Curt Hagman. He's a member of the California State Assembly. We'll get his views on the Affordable Care Act. I'm Brad Pomerance. It's Charter California Edition. Charter California Edition. I'm Brad Pomerance. We are now joined by Curt Hagman. He is a member of the California State Assembly. He's the GOP floor leader in that body. And I also want to speak with you about the Affordable Care Act. Get your sense of its rollout here in the state of California. Some would argue it's been a shining example of how the ACA can work. Others have said that there are bumps in the road even with Cover California. What's your sense?
Well, I think we have to put it in perspective. First of all, California has so much more population here than most other states. So when we talk about 40 or 80,000 or even 100,000 people roll out here, it's minor compared to the percentage of people in California who need the care. I've heard from my brokers that there are problems with our website as well. It's just the federal.
That'd be Cover California.
Yes, and they can't go in as a broker to sign someone up. There are stories of they're having the faxed applications into Sacramento since October, and it's still currently now with no response, and this policy's in at the end of the year. So there's a lot of panic out there right now.
There is no doubt that Cover California has hit some bumps. There's questions with navigators. That being said, Cover California has not faced the same challenges that healthcare.gov has faced. And so what are you hearing from your constituents about Cover California, the Affordable Care Act?
Yeah, I think a lot of it still is unknown because so many are just now waiting to switch their policies. They're getting the cancellation notices. They're trying to find the coverage. They don't know what their deductible, what their premium is going to be, who's going to take them as far as doctor coverage. I think we're going to hear a lot more about this even as people sign up for this over the next 6 months as it gets implemented.
I want to talk to you about this notion of keep your plan. We know that President Obama said in 2010, if you like your plan, you can keep it. Probably he should have included an asterisk on that statement because what we now know is that the law had indicated that if you like your plan, you could keep it if it met the standards of the Affordable Care Act. Now, whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, that's another issue, but the optics of it are tricky. We do know that President Obama did offer the states the ability to allow their insured to keep their plan if they so choose, even if the plan was, quote, substandard.
Correct.
California chose against.
Correct.
You cannot keep your plan.
Correct.
What's your sense of that?
I think it's a huge mistake. First of all, the insurance commissioner is on the other side of this as
Dave
well,
Jones.
who is a Democrat.
Right.
I have authored a bill that we'll see in January to try to extend it for a year. The reason why I don't like it is I think there's still too much unknown with the federal Affordable Care Act.
Right.
If history repeats itself, the Democrats may lose Senate in 2014, and now you have Republican-controlled Senate and Congress, and if they defund this, California's plan does not work.
Right, but let's talk about that. I mean, do you really think that if the Republicans take control of the Congress, take control of the presidency, that they're going to turn to all these new insured, by that point, millions of people, and say, we're going to take your insurance away because we have a philosophical problem with Obamacare? I mean, you really think that's possible?
I think it's a good possibility because I think a lot of those people who win, we just had a special election last couple of weeks.
Right.
Democrat holds seat for 40 years. The congressional made it on repealing the health care. So if that is the catalyst to change, perception of catalyst to change the makeup of Congress, then they have no choice but to try to come up with Plan C, whatever that Plan C is.
But that's the question. And, I'm not taking a position. I've tried to learn as much as I can about the Affordable Care Act, and I'm not sure whether it's a good thing or a bad thing. That's not for me to say. But what I do know is that throughout this entire process, there's been a lot of vituperative language against it, but yet I haven't seen the alternative. So, okay, one day, let's say the Republicans take control and the Affordable Care Act is repealed. Then what? Then what?
And I think the Republicans, well, they have put up some bills. They have not been passed.
Pieces, but they're
Correct.
not. It's not a uniform plan. It's not a plan that addresses the entire question. It nips at the margins, and maybe that's what's appropriate. Maybe we should be nibbling at the margins. But do we really undo this whole thing?
Yeah, I think it's a good possibility that it does because I think the basic foundation of mixing a free market health insurance type of place and then socializing it and making this mandate, you mix them together, they're not working too well.
But talk me through it because I really do want to kind of march through it. So what we have now is we have the exchanges. The exchanges, it's a marketplace. It's not government run, meaning the government is running the exchange, but you're not getting your insurance from the government. So where's the socialized element of it?
The socialized is that you're forcing people to buy those products that they don't want to have. Okay, so when you talk about, when you first intro,
you are requiring people
to have certain standards of products that they don't want. So I've always thought with this, we have insurance available for our 18 to 25-year-olds right now.
Right.
$60 a month, full coverage, nothing substandard. They can buy it now. Now you're saying to these same students that you need to pay $280 a month for the same coverage because someone else is going to do it. If they weren't buying it at 60, how are we going to force that group of folks to buy it at 280?
Well, I don't know the specifics of that issue.
And I'm just saying,
unless when I think of socialized medicine, I think of government-run, Canadian, British, Israeli-styled medicine.
Yeah.
This is not socialized medicine. It may be social engineering, I guess you could argue, requiring people to acquire insurance. But the flip side of that, sir, is that we're going to pay for it anyway.
Yeah.
I mean, if they're not insured, who pays? We do.
Correct.
I mean, that's kind of the irony about the whole Medicaid expansion. For states that don't accept the Medicaid expansion, well, their taxpayers are paying for the states that are, and they're going to have to pay for those that go to the emergency room.
No argument for me whatsoever
Right.
that the system needed to be changed. What's the best course of that? I think it's longer than our show could go. I have
no
other
doubt.
opinions.
Yeah.
But
unfortunately, you're in the state, not in the federal government, so you don't have to worry about it.
We are programmed by the federal dollars that come down.
We are.
90% of our money right now subsidizing California's plan is coming from federal
Well,
dollars.
100% for Medicaid expansion.
Correct.
Will be 90% in a couple of years.
Yeah, so if they cut that umbilical cord, then what I'm telling my colleagues, what is Plan B just in case? It may be out of our control.
I know that Governor Brown and the legislature passed, or Governor Brown signed, the legislature passed a bill that if the feds drop below, I think 70%, they're going to reject the expansion. Didn't that happen last year? I think so. But be that as it may, I do want to talk to you about another website. And it's a website that was either launched by or endorsed by the Republican caucus. It may or may not send people to cover California, but we do know that on this website there are attacks against the Affordable Care Act.
Sure.
Talk to us about this website and the reasons for its launch.
Sure. Well, on both sides of the caucus, both the Democrats and Republicans, we do more of it because we lose most of the time. We have websites on subjects. We have it on budget every year. We have it on education reform. And we have one on healthcare reform. We put the pros and cons as we see it, the facts as we see it on the website. Now, the recent controversy over this is political in nature. I think there's a little frustration across all lines about it, but this has been approved 6 months ago by a Democrat-controlled Rules Committee who knew about the name and knew what we put in it, and it's common practice on both sides.
Right. I think the reason why there has been some consternation is that I guess the website address is close to covered California, and so some have argued that Republican members are sending people to that website as a way to discourage folks to sign up for health care.
Well, the funny thing is we had ours online 3 months before Cover California came out.
Right.
So if there's any copying goes on, they copied ours from that. And there is marketing involved in trying to get our information out. We don't have unlimited resources to do mail it out to everybody, but there is a message we want to see. There is alternatives, there is problems with this.
But if a constituent comes to you and says to you, I need insurance, is it your policy to say, go to covercalifornia.com?
No. What I will counsel them is please learn everything about that.
Right.
Here's are your choices, and go see a broker.
And a broker can work through Cover California.
Absolutely. We actually contract out by the state to the brokers, and that's the problem we're having for our website right now is the brokers can't get on it.
I've heard that.
And so we're even having our own IT problems here in the state.
Right. Nothing like healthcare.gov.
Yeah, well, they have a lot of people
But there are issues.
coming out.
Undeniable.
And starting January 1, I hope we have these people covered.
Undeniable.
I really do want them covered one way or the other.
I hear you. His name is Curt Hagman. He is a member of the California State Assembly. He is the GOP floor leader. My name is Brad Pomerance. It's Charter California Edition. Welcome back to Charter California Edition. I'm Brad Pomerance. Our guest, Bill Bogaard. He is the mayor of Pasadena. and I want to speak with you about redevelopment. We haven't spoken about redevelopment in a long time, but redevelopment continues to be a source of contention between cities and Sacramento. Let's back up a bit before we talk about the current controversy and talk about what redevelopment was. What was redevelopment?
Redevelopment was a state-authorized financing technique by which local governments that wanted to step out and create a strong future for their communities could access funding for infrastructure, for affordable housing, for business development in a way that wouldn't otherwise be possible. And the funding source had the impact of reducing funding available to certain other taxing agencies.
Right. The way the funding source was created was there was something known as tax increment. So a certain area of a city would be deemed a redevelopment zone, and any increase in property tax through the revitalization of that area would be siphoned off and put into the redevelopment agency, which could use that money to create catalytic consequences behind. I thought you're smiling, which means I think I got it right.
Right. No, absolutely right.
And so during the fiscal crisis that was the early part of this decade, it was decided by the governor that, as you said, because that property tax money was being siphoned away from school districts, water districts, whatever it may be, the state could no longer afford the luxury of redevelopment, and that tool was completely eliminated.
It was one of the first major policy statements that the governor made after taking office about 3 years ago, that he was going to repeal or dissolve redevelopment agencies as a step in the direction of covering the gap in the Sacramento budget.
And ultimately that case was taken to the California Supreme Court. Litigation was filed and the court upheld the abolition of development agencies. We had thought over the last couple budget cycles that we would see some form of redevelopment kind of rise from the ashes, but we have not.
Not yet.
And in fact, enterprise zones were, the face of them were completely changed.
That's true.
So as we speak today, and then we'll talk more about what's happening in the aftermath, what are cities doing to try to lure business, to try to revitalize blighted areas, to try to create that catalytic project that will help the entire neighborhood improve?
Well, I think cities are planning ahead. We've gone through a strategic planning process a year ago to focus on what are Pasadena's strengths. What is it from a business point of view that makes us attractive or competitive or efficient or economical? And then to articulate those strengths in a strategy for building a strong economy and convey that to companies that are going to expand in the city or are considering or are willing to consider coming to the city. It's a matter of operating without resources.
At the same time, there has been some discussion about whether a ballot initiative could move forward that would allow local entities to seek approval from voters to tax themselves for redevelopment type projects. But now the threshold is 2/3. The discussion has been to drop it to 55%, like we have for certain school bonds.
Right.
Any traction on that front?
It hasn't moved. The reduction of the voter requirement for tax financing for bonding has not gone very strong.
Right.
It's still pending, and I think there will come a time when even the Brown administration, which has been focused exclusively on reducing the state budget deficit
and debt,
will be open to some form of financing technique that helps the local governments move the communities forward economically.
And for the advocates of that position, I would presume the creation or the arrival of a surplus in the state budget should militate in favor of their position.
That's true.
But let's continue the conversation and talk about now the challenges in the wake of redevelopment's demise. So there's no doubt that redevelopment ends on a certain day, but before that there were projects in the pipeline. And so there has been tremendous consternation about what happens to those projects that are in the pipeline. How does one define what is in the pipeline? And the Department of Finance for the state and many cities, including Pasadena, have been at war over that very question. What is in the pipeline? Talk to us about that war, which has gone to court.
Yes, it has. There needed to be a transition for redevelopment agencies because they were in the business of doing transactions. In some cases, construction was underway.
Right.
In other cases, construction was done, but indebtedness was owed and had to be repaid. And that was all to come from tax increment. So as you say, what's in the pipeline? What's going to be protected as a carryover for redevelopment agencies, the so-called successor agencies?
Right.
And what's going to be made immediately available to the state for general fund purposes?
And the state has taken a very aggressive position, trying to limit the definition of in the pipeline. And early on, the court decisions were in favor of the state's position.
That's true.
I know Pasadena, Glendale, I think Sacramento, the city brought some litigation, and it has been quite challenging for cities. But as of late, there have been some decisions which suggest that maybe the state has overstepped. And I want to talk about one decision which really is lighting up the wires, if I may say, to use an old cliche. And it focuses upon the state's efforts to claw back monies however they can. Explain what we know about this decision that recently came down through the Sacramento County Superior Court.
Well, these provisions are referred to as clawback or offset provisions, which provide the Department of Finance, as the state agency determining what's in the pipeline and what isn't, remedies to support their position. So they could take a position that such and such a transaction is not enforceable, not in the pipeline, and then they could, if the city disagreed, simply take the same amount that the state was seeking from sales tax revenues that would otherwise be passed back to the state under our system.
That's a very different beast than clawing back property tax revenue, which is where the state was getting their redevelopment funds.
That's true. That's true.
And so that's a large step. I mean, and that's, one could say, extrajudicial, because they're going above and beyond, but their position was we have the authority under the law to claw back those funds however we need to claw it back, be it through property taxes or sales tax or use tax. But what'd the court say?
Well, the court, in a ruling that occurred very recently, determined that the provisions allowing clawbacks of sales and use taxes in the way that we've just talked about is unconstitutional. And it's unconstitutional under the provisions of Proposition 22, which the proposition was approved by the voters less than 5 years ago.
Which is somewhat ironic because, as you know, Proposition 22, which was intended to prevent Sacramento from raiding city, county dollars, wound up being used to the state's advantage in the redevelopment fight, because the Supreme Court ultimately ruled that Prop 22 helped the state's position.
Well, but on this particular point, they're now saying that the clawback provisions are not enforceable by the state because it's in violation of the protections of Prop 22, the protection that that state government will not grab the funding available to.
But they can still seek those funds through the property tax. Is that right?
Yes, they can. Well, that question has not been resolved.
Oh, really?
It's still the subject of litigation, but the court was careful in delineating its attention to sales and use tax clawback and avoiding real property tax.
The saga continues. His name is Bill Bogaard. He is the mayor of the beautiful city of Pasadena, California. My name is Brad Pomerance. You have been watching Charter California Edition.